Good morning, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for registering and joining us for this, I believe, our final webinar for 2023. And today we are going to be focusing on this all-important topic of addressing mental health impacts from natural disasters. And so, as usual, before we get into it, we always want to remind you that this is part of your ongoing learning and development. And so we afforded the opportunity to just relax, learn, to network, and definitely to share your own perspectives and experiences, especially for a topic such as this that we are exploring this morning. And to have the best possible virtual learning experience, I know many of you are accustomed to our webinars. There might be one or two of you, maybe it's your first time. And if it's your first time, please tell us in the chat. But we always want to remove our distractions. We want to ensure that we close the other things that are popping up on our device, mute our phones, or turn the ringer down. Tell your colleagues, this is my learning time. Just give me an hour and then I'm free to focus on you. But allow me to lean in and to learn something. And of course, we always have these bandwidth challenges in the region from time to time, although I must say it is getting better. But it's always good to plug in an internet cable if you have that available. Now, for webinars, you don't necessarily have to use a microphone, but if you wish to, it's always a little better if you have it plugged in, working, have a headset. Helps to also mute out other noises. So, as usual, I always ask you, where are you joining us from today? And I see a lot of names that I know. Many people from our network, lots of our alumni from Montserrat in particular. Welcome. People who have worked with us or are working with us as associate consultants. I want to big up Hillary and Maria, Cheryl from Trinidad, a couple people from Jamaica, Michaela, yes, Deborah from Dominica, also see Cassandra from Grenada, temporarily in Barbados, yes, Gregory from Jamaica, Colette from the JDF, Jamaica. Colette, welcome. I think you might be a first timer. Jacqueline Barnes, always attending our webinars. Olympia, lots of you attend our webinars very regularly. And it's so good to have you. Oh, yes, I was correct. Colette, it's your first time. And I'm pretty sure you got this invitation probably through Sean Monroe, one of our alumni. Alicia Williams from Dominica, welcome. Yes. Abini from Dominica, Sasha from St. Lucia, Faye, our COVID conqueror, alumni from Barbados. Arlene McComey, yes, one of our associate consultants from Trinidad and former board member for CARICAD. Courtney in Jamaica, yes. All right. So keep on letting us know where you're joining us from. Before we get into what our presenter has to share with us, have you experienced a natural disaster? And how did it impact you and others around you? And how did it impact their mental health? And you can just share in the chat. Now, Vera from Montserrat, welcome, Vera. Now, I must admit, this wasn't a topic that we had planned to do. But those of you who are in Jamaica, right, and everybody around the region heard about it a couple of weeks ago when we had quite the earthquake here in Jamaica. And let me tell you something. My heart was in my mouth for the entire day. And of course, afterwards, we're having aftershocks And I must admit, it was hard to go to sleep because I kept on mentally, I couldn't quite sleep because I'm thinking another one might be coming, another one might be coming, right? But, and Colette says, yes, yes, she has experienced a natural disaster and she felt, and it was an earthquake, anxiety, panic, fear, trauma. Yes. Deborah survived Hurricane Maria. Oh, yes. The impacts on her family, these were real. She said, there's the fear, the anxiety, the trauma, the frustration. And Hillary is making a very good point, that, we are faced with not just natural disasters, but also hazards of every form and shape, including man-made ones. And so this week and last, we have been having challenges with bomb threats in Jamaica. She has pointed out cybersecurity threats, right? Storms and flood rains. Children in particular are traumatized and fearful. Yes. A very good friend of mine, who is from Dominica, went through Hurricane Maria, and she said her young child for maybe a year or a year and a half, whenever it rained heavily, the child would just be traumatized all over again. And the child would say, oh, Maria's coming, Maria's coming back, Maria's coming back. But one of the things that I am looking at the positive is that we're actually having these discussions. And I think particularly with Hurricane Maria, that year, it wasn't just a Maria, it was quite a few, that I think we started to really accept and to talk about mental health, particularly, not generally, but particularly as it relates to mental health impacts caused by natural disasters and other hazards, right? And so I noted, I live in Jamaica, but wait, I did not introduce myself. I just assumed you all knew me. My apologies. I am Dr. Loy Parks, and I am the Leadership Development and Institutional Strengthening Specialist with the Caribbean Center for Development Administration, known commonly as CARICAD. Right. So I noted that when I listened to the news items around this earthquake, that much of it related to addressing the mental health impact. I recall going back to 1988, my first natural disaster of any major proportion was Hurricane Gilbert. And I don't recall there being any news item about mental health impact. People talked about the physical damage to our infrastructure, to water supply, electricity supply. I remember there were problems with crime and security and looting. That's what it was all about. But not about, well, people are going to be affected mentally, and what are the strategies for dealing with that? Annie also said she experienced anxiety having experienced Hurricane Maria. Yeah, and Hillary said, this is such an important subject, an important part of how we deal with disaster management, right? And Cassandra, her major experience of a natural disaster was Hurricane Ivan, and she talks about the fear and the trauma, yes, and how it affected her children in particular, yes. No, I remember Hurricane Ivan as well, and I recall I was now an adult, but let me tell you, at one point, the anxiety was so great, I was in the fetal position on the floor of my bathroom. Yes. Ivan was the first one for Colette as well. Then, Hurricane Nicole. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And I'm also curious about what were some of the strategies that you use to deal with some of these impacts? What were some of the strategies? And so for me, it's really about talking about how I was feeling and not keeping it inside. And I recall during Hurricane Ivan. Now, thankfully, our infrastructure was stronger then. And so we still had a phone service. And I had a very good friend at the time who just happened to call me while I was on the fetal position. I mean, I could barely breathe. I was literally having a panic attack. And he was able to just say, all right, calm down, Lauren, just to calm, kind of walk me through some deep breathing, talk me through until I could get up off the floor. All right. What are some of the things that you have done to help you deal with some of the mental health impacts? The college said support from friends, very important. College said just telling yourself you are okay. Courtney says Gilbert was exciting as his first hurricane, but Ivan was terrifying. Oh, yes. No, Gilbert came in the day. I remember that clear as day, all pun intended, and so maybe that was part of it. Ivan, I remember, was very slow moving. First, it was going to land. It was, we're in Jamaica anyway. This was 5 o'clock. Then it was another hour, then another hour. And finally, that beast hit us midnight, pitch black. And I think that just added to the terror of it all. Yeah. So thank you for sharing. And we're going to have more time to share. And before we get to our topic, just especially for those who are new to us, what is CARICAD and what is it that we do? We are an arm of CARICOM, and we have been in existence over 40 years. And we serve 17 member states directly in the area of public sector transformation. And what you see listed here are just some of the various services, technical assistance that we provide to our clients. We do a lot of work around organization development, change management, leadership development, developing governance and policy arrangements, policy development, strategic planning, business process analysis, monitoring and evaluation, contingency and business continuity planning. And we have a whole plethora of tools around a lot of these areas, and we encourage you to visit our website at caricad.net, especially given the topic that we're talking about. Today, we actually have a business continuity planning template, and you can access that through our website. Very, very useful, developed during COVID, but not just relevant to COVID, but dealing with business continuity that we have to think about given all the many hazards that we can face. And our work is guided by our Charter for the Public Service, and this really creates a common platform that all member states can use to guide the public sector transformation process. And I won't spend a lot of time here, but again, information around the charter, etc., the implementation guide that is associated with the charter, all of this is available via our website. So, to the main event for our webinar today, it is my delight to introduce to you Mrs. Teresena Fergus. And Teresena is currently the Director of Social Services for the government of Montserrat. I had the absolute privilege of meeting Teresena when we partnered with the government of Montserrat to deliver a customized senior leadership development program, and she was one of the participants. And I also had the privilege of being her executive coach. And I know that this is an area not only why is she an expert in this? It's from many angles. This is an area that she has studied extensively, right? But not only that, she is also speaking from her experience as a practitioner and as just a human being, a citizen of Montserrat. And for those who don't know, Montserrat, became very famous in the mid-2000s when they experienced the volcanic eruption of the Soufrière. And yes, Soufrière isn't, there are many Soufrières in the region, right? The French word for volcano. And we seem to have been lazy in naming our volcanoes. But Montserrat as a society really it upended a lot of things. And the year when that happened, it wasn't only that, they had a number of um, other kinds of natural disasters, hurricanes, etc., flooding, heavy rains. I mean, these are people who have been there, done that, and can write the book. And so, with that, I want to invite Teresena now, whose camera is on. I'm going to take off my camera and allow her to just walk us through her own perspectives as an individual, as a professional, about addressing the mental health impacts of natural disasters. Teresena, you may unmute. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parks. Good morning, everyone. It is a privilege to present on a topic that is dear to me. And thank you for having me, Dr. Parks.
You're most welcome.
Dr. Parks said while Dr. Parks was talking about the trauma, I had to wipe my face because I felt like I was breaking out in sweat. And that is what I would call trauma. So trauma can recur, even though you've been through many disasters, even though you get the necessary support. Take heart that your traumatic experience can actually be triggered by another disaster. Okay, so I want to take, because some of us, of course, would is very versed in this area, but some would not. So I want to take you all through the literature first, and then we'll get at the heart of the matter, which is a study that I've done on Montserratians' resilience in an ongoing natural disaster. And that highlighted a number of things that I would like to share with you all. So quickly, let's go through the introduction. Well, we all know that natural disasters are very common in the Caribbean. I mean, just listen to Dr. Parks mention so many different things. Montserrat, we had a number of hurricanes, and then we have the volcano. And so it actually is linked to mental health, and it's very complex because it's not everyone who went through a natural disaster has this same mental health complications, because all of us are different and we handle mental health in a different way. Now, it actually brings, because of all these natural disasters, the Caribbean is not only the Caribbean, let's say is a global issues, is very complex. And one of the things that he brought before is the need to have a robust risk management, awareness, and understanding of the recovery process to the individual and also to the community and the national levels. Okay, and it also, what it does is that it tells us that individual and the community actually they undergo a very dynamic process. It's not as simple as we think, and that allows them to cope and overcome stressful events. And this may account for a number of factors, which I would let you know later on in my presentation. So the next slide is looking at basically the aims for this today. So the aim for today is to gain a better understanding of the impact of natural disasters on mental health on the individual and community and the national levels. And also to consider ways of managing your mental health during and after a natural disaster. And is to understand the complexity behind why some individuals are affected more than others. And this also helps you to guide the various interventions. And it's also help us to help to guide how we address, especially as a counselor, how do I actually counsel my clients who has a mental health issue. So we are looking also at definitions. So the definition of mental health is basically World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being, in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, and can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to contribute to his or her community. The American Psychiatric Association defines mental illnesses as a health conditions involving changes in emotions, thinking, or behavior, or a combination of these. And then mental health illnesses can be associated with distress or problems functioning in social, work, or family activities. And of course, I introduced trauma because trauma plays a major part. And what it defines are the stress events that present extraordinary challenges to coping and adaptation. And the definition for natural disasters basically is that natural disasters is defined as some rapid, instantaneous, or profound impact of a natural environment upon the socioeconomic system. And WHO defines as a disaster as a sudden ecologic phenomenon of sufficient magnitude to require external assistance. So a natural disaster can happen suddenly. And the question beckons, can we be prepared for such a sudden disaster? Can we? And I will leave you to answer that question after the presentation. Now, natural disasters and its impact. I listened to Dr. Parks in the beginning, and of course, natural disasters have very much impact on our mental health. And it impacts in so many different ways, on the individual level, on the community level, and on the national level. It causes severe disruption. And I remember when I've done my study with Montserrat, one of the things that a person keep on saying is that, and I think if people had to sit down and think or count up the losses that they had, they would have gone crazy. So it's obvious that it can cause mental illnesses, psychological disturbance, and also environmental, communities, families. It can cause major disruption to lives, loss of life, of course, and also lead people to increase their substance abuse, or very well start to use a substance that they never used before, just to help them to cope. Natural disasters affect people differently, as mentioned before. For many individuals, the effects of having experienced a natural disaster can continue to linger long after the event has occurred, and can manifest into psychological problems. So it doesn't just stay put. If something happened, like when I was just to give a quick example, when Dr. Parks called me, I was in Barbados airport, and she spoke to me about the earthquake in Jamaica. And when she put on the phone, I look up in the roof and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, there's a lot of, those of you have been to Barbados, the roof, there's big blocks of concrete. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay then, if an earthquake happened, those big blocks of concrete will drop. So I start to now prepare myself to flee. What's my plan of action? And that's what, as you've been through many traumatic experiences, you're always on your guard, or you have a plan. All right. And so we will look at all that at nearly the end of the presentation. I just wanted to introduce the fact that it can stay with you over a period of time. It does not just suddenly go. And then we look at mental health and natural disasters. And I'm just going to take you in terms of the individual's ability to cope in a stressful situation is affected by the resources which they lose, such as loved ones' hopes and dreams. So if the more resources you lose, or the more loved ones, or your hopes and your dreams, is the more your mental health can be affected. All right. And the ability to work for the grief process and the resources they have access to. So if you don't have friends around you, or if you don't have psychological first aid, or you don't have money, finance, if you don't have resources around you, the likelihood of it continuing is higher. All right. Or the grief is very high. And the greater the property loss and the relocation of families are associated with greater negative psychological problems. So when we as counselors or professional persons in the different jobs like social workers, they have to, when they're addressing a disaster or persons who've been through, they have to study about what does the person at the time concentrate on? What is what it is? Is it the fact that the person lost a mother or father, and that will tell them where, to some degree, how much help can be given to that person. Now, mental health disaster, mental health illnesses and natural disaster is that the fact that we as Caribbean people, we're prone to it. It impact in both ways, basically. In two ways, it impact. And so it can impact on people being more resilient by building protective factors. And those protective factors are very important in coping with natural disasters. These are unique coping skills to counteract psychological issues. It can increase the risk of being less resilient and therefore more susceptible to psychiatric or psychological problems. All right. And there's no simple explanation why some people overcome a traumatic event when others do not, and the role that resilience plays in understanding this phenomenon. So resilience play a major role, and the question beckons, what is resilience? Do we have it? Is it a natural ability that we have? Do we learn it? And so the definition, I would like to take this time out to go into the definition, and I'm looking at the literature here, because I have every intention to give you the definition from the Montserrat's perspective, which is slightly different. Now, the 3 different layers of resilience. Or before I go into the layers, let's look at, I have before me, thank you, Dr. Parks, for sharing my slides. I must keep up with you. The literature review suggests that resilience is a multi-layered and cannot be explained as one single concept, all right? And is defined as a complex repertoire of behavioral tendencies. Other definitions point to the personality trait that develops over time. It also points to the characteristics, the adaptive characteristics of an individual to cope and recover from, and sometimes even after an adversity. Now, resilience has been shown to protect against post-traumatic breakdown and can help to ease an individual's feelings of helplessness when faced with pressure or setback. Resilience is thus seen as having certain characteristics that assist with coping. So the next slide, look at the different resilience from the individual level, the community level, and the national level. Now, the individual resilience is basically the ability to maintain a stable level of functioning following traumatic events. All right, and it is actually a trajectory of healthy functioning across time. So an individual having resilience actually help them in a mix of a crisis to, rather than panic, to stay focused and say, okay, what do I do? Shall, you know, rather, so that in one sense, but resilience can be learned. It can be learned over a period of time with the necessary support. At the community or social level, this is the capacity to foster, engage, and sustain positive relationships and ensure and recover from life stresses and social isolation. So in the community resilience, can you imagine someone who is someone who does not keep company, does not have any friends? That is social isolation. In this case, they would have, and that's why it's important that when a disaster happens, the community comes together. You have community activities. You maybe have a community party. You maybe have a community meeting. You know, so you bring people, and sometimes, of course, person doesn't join those community meetings. But it's good sometimes to go on the individual level to the person who you know would not come out. So community and social resilience is very much important when it comes to natural disaster. So the national resilience, this is what it does, it takes into consideration the issue of society's sustainability and strength in several diverse realms. All right, so it looks at a bigger picture there. All right, it consider all the issues in the community, how to sustain, how to strengthen. Possible maybe you need a clinic in a neighborhood that doesn't have, so it goes on a higher level. All right, so we're now looking at an understanding of resilience in the Montserrat context and the mental health of it. So during my studies, I did a study on, you know, I always hear this term, all the Montserratians on the platform will always hear how Montserratians are so resilient. They're so resilient. They've been through a hurricane, they've been through a volcano, and they're still standing. And that used to annoy me. I'm like, what on earth is resilient? What are they getting at? I don't understand, because although I'm still standing, the question beckons, I am not living, I'm existing. So in the Montserrat context, so I did a study looking at those persons, all the Montserratians who've been through the volcano, and the impact of counseling on them, whether or not that helps, and the feeling of what they understand resilience to be made. Now, the definition of resilience from their end is presented as having the ability to cope and overcome all situations. So that's their definition. And to overcome feelings in order to survive, to be strong and fearless. Now, the emotional and psychological impact is of the trauma of the volcano. What it does, there's a lot of people who were very, as uncertainty came out and displacement, there was a lot of grief happening around that. The fact that you have to leave your village and come to the other side of the island, and your family members left you, they're gone to the UK and other different Caribbean countries. You don't know whether or not you're coming or going. So that sense of displacement was very, very impactful in Montserrat's life at the time. And then, of course, persons were searching for explanation. Why didn't it happen? Where this volcano come from? Did we always have a volcano? You know, so people start to make sense of the disaster. And then the loss and the bereavement, people were grieving. And they were grieving the sense of their homes, family members gone, the loss of their jobs, the loss of the place that they're accustomed to, the community, the friends that they knew. There was a lot of loss and bereavement happening during that interview I did with Montserrat. Now, there's a cultural resilience that came up, and that considers the perception of what others think of you and how you look to others. Now, that cultural resilience, I'm not sure if it's in other Caribbean countries, but it's very keen to, very important to Montserrat. And that's what helped them to cope. So rather than break down and cry, and the neighbors see that as, they see it as a weakness. So of course, what they do, they muster their strength, they muster their energy, and they present it as being normal. They, you know, and so they are very much concerned of what people think of them, and the need to retain the cultural status quo of the community. So if you have a high status quo of the community, you want to maintain that. If you're seen as someone who is, you know, very strong, you know, well-dressed, well-presented, you're not going to break down during this crisis. So there's a cultural aspect of it that sustains persons during a natural disaster. Now, resilience also presented in the Montserrat context as a cultural mask. So you mask up yourself. So someone said to you, how are you? I'm blessed. I'm fine. I'm doing. But inwardly, it's not that you're blessed or fine. It's just that you're masking your emotions. So that, as I said, it is people at that time did not want to express how they feel openly. And that's what we consider to be a cultural resilience. It can be positive and it can be negative. I would explain a bit further in my presentation. Now, the counseling and resilience now, person did not consider themselves resilient until they have counseling. So is when they go into so some persons, they in essence, they were like, yeah, we're making it. But when you listen to the conversation, they're not living, they're just coping. It's when they go into counseling now and they express themselves and they talk and the counselors take them through all the things that they've been through, using their strength to help them, then they recognize, okay, then I have a level of resilience. I've been through this, I've been through that, and I'm coming through. So that counseling aspect actually helps person. The talking that we call it the talk shop in as counselors. You go in and you express yourself and you talk. But in the meantime, what the counselor does is to identify all your strength. And as you identify, work with you to identify your strength, that would build your capacity or your resilience then. Now, the religion aspect of it was very much on par with all the other studies that I did. Individuals strongly express religion as a contributing factor to them being resilient. Religion or religious faith has significant impact on how people cope with trauma. All the participants I interviewed have a sense of hopefulness during the crisis as a result of them believe in God. Yeah, they were holding strongly. So religious belief plays a key role in overcoming mental health issues due to a national disaster. So, and one of the things that the study point is that spiritual or religious belief and practices are evident to be in most cultures. And it's something that worth strengthening because, as I said, that is not everybody believe in God. But if you believe in something, if you believe that someone is going to help you overcome, it's about faith and believing. So you master your strength and you do what you have to do, knowing that God will protect you. So that's really religion and resilience are very much linked. The next slide. So what we have before us is the Montserrat context or Montserratian context and the mental health effects. So the study shows that is like an iceberg. So you're seeing persons getting along, they're going about their way, they're smiling, but under is all the disassociation, they disassociate the emotions then. All right. They is buried. And what counseling does is to actually bring it to the surface and work with it. So they appear emotionless, they appear to be tough, they appear to be hard. Hardness is a level of strength. So there is a mass-like resilience that is happening on the surface. But below the surface now is where they have all the repressed emotions, the worries, the fears, the cultural perceptions of who looking at me or who talking me, the self-identity issues, the lack of confidence. So all of these are down at the bottom. So what you see, it looks like they are resilient. It shows that they, but below is another level that needs to be dealt with in counseling. So when we as professionals working in an emergency or disaster, we have to look at what's below the iceberg, the level. That level is important. That's the buried unconscious resilience that can be built and changed. It is in something that is different. Now, trauma in Montserrat context went on, and what we discovered is that the people of Montserrat who have lived through previous and current natural disasters may find that such circumstances can be the foundation for morbidity and disaster-related symptoms. So because of that mass-like resilience that most of us have, it can lead, if more disaster happen, or not, sometimes it's not necessary more disaster, it can lead to other issues like sicknesses, mental health problem. Something can trigger that buried resilience. And when it triggers it may come across as a mental health disease. It's a post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, I remember having conversations and person was saying, oh, one of the things that most sessions can be is very negative. Is that they always, they're negative, they're thinking, they never see. And that can also cause the fact that we've been through many things. Yeah. We've been through many things. So when you look at the positive is very hard sometimes. All right. And I just want to introduce a study done by Bonanno. Now, because my study also showed that there's a big difference between resilience and recovery. Right. So even though you have resilience, you may not, that doesn't say that you're on your way to recovery, because as I said, you do have the buried resilience. You do have a level of resilience that needs to tap into and change from a negative to a positive, or change from just coping to living. And so those two words, resilience and recovery, they are slightly different, and that would be another presentation. All right, let's move on quickly. What contributes to building resilience? Now, studies show that social support, I mentioned that before, contributes to the individual resilience. The way people relate to each other, agreeableness, trustworthiness, level of trust. It's very hard sometimes to trust. I think the word trust can cause an issue, but is about relating and trusting people, having a sense of genuineness when you talk to people. So the interpersonal resources and capabilities, sharing, attentive listening. It also the collective resources and capacities, group identity and centrality, care for physical protection, personal attitudes, perceptions, and feelings towards one's community. If you love your community, you live in, with your resilience would build big. As a disaster happen, you come together as a community, you love each other, you care for each other. The availability of community resources is key you definitely have to have resources in the community, whether that is a playground for children, a community center that where women can go and learn how to cook and sew and things like that, they will find employment. And so it's important to have each country will have the community resources so that person can help themselves during a natural disaster. Now, the social cohesion and trust in leadership, that helps the politicians, your leaders, your premiers, your governors. If you have that kind of trust in them, and that would help you in a time of a disaster. This contributes to community and social resilience. Patriotism and optimism and social integration and trust in political and public institutions link with the national or social resilience. So if you love your country, it's from the higher level. You think you do, rather than thinking negatively. The government puts something forward, and right away you bat it down. But you think on a positive and say, oh, maybe it can actually work. How do we make it work? So it don't become it can be we now. You're working together. And so what it is, the next slide basically showed a man who asked us what it is. It's not feeling sad. It's not feeling sad because everything is going wrong. It's feeling sad because everything is going right. It's not something you live with. It's something you are in. What you fear the most is the shame, the embarrassment, the whispers in the hallways that we are weak, the stigma. So you hold it and you hide it. Now, this behavior of saying mental health, a lot of people would hide their mental health due to the fact that the persons would perceive them as being weak. It's a stigma. Just recently, I did a symposium, facilitated a symposium with the church, and the studies show that there's a big stigma against mental health, against not wanting to seen as being crazy. And so that would impact on you receive the necessary help you need during a disaster. And so barriers that prevent persons from seeking help are something that we have to look at and address. So the next slide have various barriers. And one of the barriers that I identify as the first one is financial issues. Money answer our prayers. I mean, that's a saying that I hear going at money answer our prayers, whether or not we believe it or not. But financial issue. If you're facing with financial issues during a crisis, what would happen? Of course, you can't buy food, you can't leave the island. So of course, those are barriers that will prevent you from seeking any help, or, it can affect you during a crisis. Access to mental health intervention. Now, if you don't know how to access mental health, I mean, the symposium I did the other day, some person wasn't sure how they could access mental health. I'm not sure about the other countries. But in Montserrat, some persons did not know how to access mental health. They did not know what is an offer. And then there's the stigma of not taking the injection because the injection gonna make them like zombies, like. So these are the kind of thoughts, perceptions that would stop persons from seeking help during a crisis. The mass-like resilience I mentioned that Montserratians have, repressive coping, which appears to be very much part of the Montserratian culture, can act as a mobilizer to assist individual cope, that is to survive. However, there's the flip side of it. It can have adverse mental health consequences if not given the opportunity to be expressed. And on the flip side, the attributes of repressed corpus can be used to foster adaptation to extreme adversity. So you have the good and the bad. All right, and that's a debate we can have a discussion over at the end of the presentation. Should we let our mass-like resilience come to the surface so it can be addressed, or should we bury it And that would help us to cope. Rather than live, you will just exist. You will just cope. So that's a question that is on the floor to be discussed. So most Russians learn how to get on with it regardless. So we get on with it. If there's another disaster happen, I'm sure we'll just get on with it because that's what we're accustomed to. So it appears to be resilience, but may not necessarily need to seek therapeutic help. All right. In other words, cultural characteristics is important, are very much important in our society, and that can promote resilience, and it can prevent individual forms from seeking help. So it's important that each country know their cultural, what is their cultural perception, what foster that the behavior pattern then. All right, because if you know what foster the behavior pattern, then you'll put interventions to address that. And now one of the things that is to know yourself. You got to know yourself. All right. Now, if you don't know yourself, and sometimes we get so busy with our life, our daily life, our children, our marriage, our work, that you don't take time out to understand self. To understand when you feel a pain in your hand is very unusual. You may need to seek medical attention. This is not the first time you recognize it, or you just ignore it and go away. So you have to understand your triggers, your alerts, and the shifting in time, in the weather. So those are the things. If you know yourself, then you will know how to cope. You will have an idea. But if you don't know yourself and then a disaster happen, then you will have to cope with disaster and also yourself in what is telling you. Now, and so it's important that one, we know where to go for mental health interventions and what interventions are there on offer. So the next slide speaks about the awareness, the addressing the mental health during a natural disaster, right? Now, I said a lot of things, and I'm sure it's a lot of food for thought. And so I just want to do a quick summary of how you can get help, how you can address your mental health during a natural disasters. Now, as I say, everybody reacts to a disaster differently. All right. So it's not all plaster will fit the one cut. So there are different methods or different assistance out there, and you will have to know which one suits you. So of course I mentioned counseling as the first, because of course I'm a counselor, and I would say it works. I've been through it, I've been through counseling, and as Dr. Parks mentioned earlier, just by talking to a friend, just expressing yourself actually helps. And the humor, laugh, get jokes, meet with other people around the table and look at what happened the other day. It's serious, yes, but the humor helps you to move forward. All right. So the earthquake that happened in Jamaica, you may want to look at the possible human in it and see, and laugh with your friends. But of course, it's serious. So humor can actually assist you during a time of crisis. And social support, as we know, is important. Physical exercise. That's definitely will help you to clear your mind and give you the extra boost your body need to go forward. Education, one of the key aspects is to educate people. The other day I was passing and I saw a sign to say what happened, what would you do in a tsunami? And that for me was very useful. I read it and I said, this basically said, go on higher ground. And in my head, okay, if this happened, I'll run. This is my strategy. I know where to go if I'm in the area. So education and having billboards around a country explaining what would you do if you have an earthquake, if you have a tsunami, if you have a flood, if little pointers that would help the everyday persons who walking on the street and seeing these signs. Now, physical information sign posting about mental health intervention. Where can you get the mental health from? Which clinic? Who operate? What time? These are the things that are very important. Of course, spiritual influences. We're from the Caribbean, and most persons will go to church and know God. And you have to believe in something, to have faith, that God is going to take you through. All right. And individual competencies, the tenacity, so you have your personality traits that other person may not have. And those are the ones that help you go through the difficult times. You're cultivating secure relationship, tolerance of negative affect, and acceptance of strengthening effects of stress. So all persons to some degree have their characteristics, their own individual characteristics that will take them through. Optimism, look at the bright side, not the negative. You know, you keep on looking at the light, not the dark. You go forward. And then the cognitive flexibility or reappraisal of reframing. You reframe yourself. So you stop, you pause, and you motivate yourself again. You said this, you know, so you keep on reframing. You keep on, you know, you appraise yourself. You take a stock of yourself. All right. And that's will help you with the ability to replace negative thoughts with positive thoughts. And so we're coming to the end. And I just say mental health during a natural disaster. Some of the things that you can do is be prepared. Work on building your resilience. You can work on building your resilience. Know what works for you. Have a plan. Know yourself. There was a period of time when most socials were working. I'm not sure we still do it, but I still do it. We were working with our passports. We were working our passports in our bag. We have a little backpack at home just in case something happened, or it's in the car, or is in our, you know, is on our job. It's a passport, all important documents. This, I remember when I was studying with my children, one of the things I always say to them, have water. You know, it's a must that you have water, even though my car is full of different bottles of water. So I always have water, and that was work for me. Yeah, I'm thinking during a crisis, water is important. So those are the little things you could think about what works for you. And of course, your psychological first aid and your counseling and your psychotherapy, which I mentioned earlier. So it's a multiple intervention plan. It's not just one. So one intervention may not necessarily helps. You have more than one intervention. This kind of helps over time to support and overcome or rebuild in a broader national sense. All right. So national disaster policy, of course, I would say from national end, all countries should have a comprehensive natural disaster policy that addresses the mental health on the individual, community, and a higher level. And so I just did a quick summary, and then after that is open to questions. So I summarize by saying trauma comes in many forms and people's reactions vary. It is important that individuals' feelings should be considered. A combination of interventions are required during a natural disaster. The psychotherapists, the managers, the leaders, they need to understand the level of resilience in the community, both on the individual level and both on the natural level. Community and social engagements are important in offsetting mental health during a natural disasters. Be mindful that person may not immediately show systems of distress. Yeah, it comes later. You cope better if you understand yourself. If you understand yourself, what works for you, if you take stock of yourself by preparing, you're eating well, you're exercising, you have a plan, that helps during a crisis. Culture plays a part of how quickly the community recovers from a natural disaster with liquid effects. So the culture, your cultural behaviors can, to understand them, you can work a plan to address person on a community level and also the national level. The impact of natural disasters on mental health is multi-layered with personal and cultural elements to it. All right, so it's not as simple as it appears. This needs to explore if therapeutic intervention is to be successful. And of course, I mentioned about the comprehensive and inclusive national disaster policy that address on the individual, community, and on the national level. All right, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Teresena. Thank you. Lots of food for thought. Thank you for the comprehensive presentation, the research and preparation that would have gone into it. And so we have about, I would say, approximately 15 minutes for some Q&A discussion. And so we invite persons to put their questions in the chat. And so let me ask the first question, Teresena, and it is this. During the times of a natural disaster, most of us here, I believe, on the platform are civil servants, and we may have responsibility to be, leading, participating in the disaster response from a government standpoint. But you are also an individual affected by the very thing. So you're given relief, and you need relief yourself. You might be comforting people, and you want to comfort yourself. How do you, as a civil servant, you're lead, you have to keep your head to be part of the disaster response of government, but you really want to go cry and go get some relief for yourself? How do you cope with that?
And that's a good question. It's been asked many times by my staff. We also need intervention. And so one of the things that I always would say to my staff, and I always do with my staff, is to have a check-in, a mental health check-in. So of course we all group together in a meeting, and we discuss our feelings. And of course, remember I said to you, always as an individual, you have to know yourself. And so I would say to persons, yes, your job as a social worker or a counselor, the first thing you need to do is check in with yourself, where you're at. And if you have a supervisor or if you have a counselor, check with them first. So I always say, check in with yourself first before you're administered. Yes, you can go, but if you don't check in with yourself first, guess what can happen? Tell me what can happen, Dr. Parks.
Burnout.
Exactly.
You're of no use to anybody else.
Exactly. So you do have to know yourself, what your capabilities like, what your resilience is like, how high it is or how low it is. I do have a high resilient level, and it's been built over the years. And so resilience can actually be built. You can build it. The more disaster you're being through, you can have the ability to cope better than other persons. But as I always come back to the individual, know yourself, equip yourself, and seek the necessary help you need as a professional, before you go and assist someone else. So always check in with yourself.
Indeed. And I see Hillary Alexander saying in the chat, the importance of self-care. That's a highlight. So Colette says, as a member of the Jamaica Defense Force, this is profound. During the bomb threat, all I could think about was my daughter was at school experiencing this. Then I went to the school to pick up my daughter. Person seeing the uniform automatically started leaning on me to help them. I felt overwhelmed, as I just wanted to get my child and ensure that she's safe. How do you deal with that social anxiety? So true. So
it
another angle that even if you're not on duty, you're on duty as a public official.
That's it. And one of the things on a national level that the government is to build the psychological first aid. So you just don't have the same person tending to people. You got to change over. When there's a need to seek outside help, you seek outside help. But and this is a sharing. One of the things I do if something happened, I actually plant my feet on the ground. So what I'm doing, I'm stabilizing myself. Yeah. So it's a technique. So you plant because you're staying focused, and then you start to get in touch with your emotions and see what's going on with you. And maybe you don't have time to do that. Some say you don't have time to do those things, but you learn these things over time. And of course, you have your friends, you have persons that you could tap into, you have your boss, so use the help that is around you, I would say. And do not be afraid to express emotions. One of the things that I found in Montserrat is that persons are afraid to share their vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
They just don't like it. It's a cultural thing. They do not like to share their vulnerabilities. And so if you don't share, if you don't learn to share your vulnerabilities, when you have a crisis and it impacts you, where are you going to get the help from? And this is where God, the spiritual aspect comes into that. Person said that they will pray. And yes, it helps. So, so you have different ways that persons can receive the necessary help. But as I said, you just have to know yourself.
No, indeed. And Ophelia made a very interesting point here. Having an incident where someone who experienced the earthquake is traumatized by the earthquake recently, but not dealing with the trauma and ended up in an accident with Ophelia. And it's so true. I always recommend, whenever you experience trauma, I think particularly when people experience, a death of a close family member or spouse, that it might be useful not to drive for a while because you really don't have the ability to concentrate as you need to. So here, Teresena, so Hillary is saying you talked about the multi-level intervention points, which is not as easily available in many of our countries, Sorry, I have to laugh. I saw the video. So as soon as the earthquake happened, there was a video and a dance. We did the same thing with Gilbert. I thought almost everybody knew that Love and Their song, Wild Gilbert. That seemed to be part of our cultural resilience, that we have to make a song and dance about. There's a proverb that we have, take kinty cover heartburn, meaning you laugh to cover your the pain or your trauma. And so this leads me to another question, right? How do we know when the mask is too much? So you talk about masking, and I think masking, you might need it so we can get through today, get through to deal with some of the pressing things. But then we might mask too much where we're now not addressing the thing. How do you know when the mask is now too much and we need to go deeper to address your trauma?
That mask that most of us wear, even without a disaster, we wear it.
Yes.
And if you realize your mask is cracking, and when I say cracking, you no longer can contain your emotions. It's either you're getting physically affected with headaches or psychologically affected with anxiety. Now, anxiety attacks is a trigger point that tells you something is wrong. When you start to get anxious over everything, you realize, okay, this is time to check in. This is a check-in. So it comes back to the individual. How they grow up, what is a level of persons now have to know. And as I said, it's hard for sometimes people don't have an insight. So it will take a boss, a supervisor, or you take a friend to tell you, Terry, something not right. But something's not right. I noted that your outburst is coming very, very quickly in all these days. You're not handling yourself. You're getting very nervous. You're getting panicky. You're breathing heavily. Your hands sweating. So these are some of the signs that you look for. And one of the things that trauma does is PSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and it triggers by anxiety where you feel like you're not breathing. And when you get to that point, you may need to seek the necessary help, or it's just going to get worse. So it's early detection by knowing yourself. All right. And or somebody else know that this is not the Terry, this is somebody else different. Yeah. And would point it out to you. And not only that, to Dr. Pass, one of the things that persons don't necessarily like, as I said to you, is the idea of people thinking that they're crazy.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, most of us are crazy then, because the majority of us being through crisis. And our reaction sometimes can get to the point that people think you're crazy. I said to you when I was in Barbados and you mentioned it, I started thinking, okay, I need an escape route. I'm looking up in the roof. I'm looking at the different exit points. How quickly can I leave this room? If I go outside, what would happen? And so you start to think. And that's what trauma does. So you have to know when to seek the help as an individual.
Indeed. There's another question in the chat from Ophelia, very important one. And it really has to do with, the disaster responses, particularly in an organizational setting. And so she's relating to the fact that, you have your procedures. So there's an earthquake, this is what people ought to do, right? But in her experience recently with the earthquake in Jamaica, here are people doing the thing telling them not to do. And even though they're trying to tell them, no, don't go here, we're not supposed to use the stairwell, they're still doing it. So, and mainly because people are panicking. And so how do we address that? And I mean, if I were to say, offer a response, I mean, part of it is, maybe it's ongoing education and reminders that we need to have. A lot of these things need to happen a little bit more frequently.
Yes.
So, repetition would help to embed this in people's minds so that they're more likely to have the kinds of reaction that we are trained them to do. But if it's too infrequent, that training and those reminders, then it comes out of their memory, But Teresena,
I can add to that. You do mock exercises.
Yes.
If you're working for a company, every so often you do an exercise where you have different disasters. And you do the drills. And I'm not gonna say you're not gonna panic when it actually happens, but at least that would release some of your anxiety and you'll know what to do. It helps over time. So drills, mock drills, very much help also in such a time like this.
Yeah. So folks, we're really just about at the end. And Teresena, if there was one short parting thought you'd have for us, what would that be?
Be ready. Be prepared. We are living in a changing era, changing time. Things that we have not experienced, we are experiencing now. Be prepared and be ready. That's my part of the show.
Be prepared and be ready. Teresena, it is always a delight. We have talked about doing a webinar of this nature, even from long ago, long before. And I'm so happy that it happened. And it happened when it was supposed to happen. And so thank you for sharing your insights. And for those who have joined us late, not to worry, this session is recorded and you can access that recording later on in the week via our YouTube channel. Just search for Caribbean Center for Development Administration. And so while we just wrap up now, I just want to share with you that applications are now open for our Leading Change workshop that will take place across 4 days in January 2024. And so you can check our website for the registration form for additional details on the workshop. And you can also email us at info@caricad.net for more information. And as usual, Roger, do we have our evaluation poll? There it is in the chat. We always want to hear from you. How did this webinar go for you? How useful you found it? What other topics you might want us to cover in 2024? And so we asked you to just fill out this very, very short poll. And as I said earlier, this is in fact our final webinar for 2023. Thank you all so much for your ongoing support, for those who registered, attend, those who share the invitations with others, those who go back and listen on YouTube, etc. And we wish you all the very best for the remainder of 2023. And you can look out. We have some very interesting programs and developments and webinars lining up to roll out in 2024. So continue to keep in touch with us. Thank you all so very much. Have a wonderful rest of the week, month, and 2023.